Good evening. I'm Dino Dave. Welcome to the Creation Investigation. I'm so happy to be with you here in Concord, New Hampshire, my own hometown. Over the next few days, we'll be talking about some really important topics. You see, the Creation Investigation is a conversation about origins, covering some of our most foundational questions. Does truth exist, and can we know it? An area of inquiry that philosophers call epistemology. How do we know there's a God? How did our world come to be this way? Did things just evolve by chance? We'll start with some really broad questions and then get a bit more specific, kind of like a funnel, kind of honing in. For example, what was it like on the early days of our primeval planet? Is there actual scientific evidence of a flood and Noah's Ark? And how did dinosaurs fit into history? Are they even mentioned in the Bible? Finally, we'll wrap up with this question. If there is a creator, how can we know what religious tradition is correct? Do we have compelling evidence that the Bible actually is the Word of God? So tonight's session is absolute truth. Absolute truth in a postmodern world. I want to start this evening with some questions. Let's make sure everybody's awake and with me. So I'm looking for a little bit of participation here. Here's my first question. Why did Jesus come into the world? Yes. To save us from sin. Very good. The angel said, call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sin. There's multiple answers to the question. Somebody else. Yes, to show us how to live. Very good. Absolutely. Christ is our pattern for how to live, to demonstrate to us how to live. Yes, to demonstrate God's love to us. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. So there are multiple reasons. But tonight I would actually like to take you to a very specific situation at the end of Jesus Christ's earthly ministry. Here we see a ridiculous scene. We see Jesus Christ, the very creator of the universe, on trial before an earthly judge, a man called Pontius Pilate. And here Jesus is being tried by his own creation. It's such an absurd scene that you can almost imagine the angels looking over the courts of heaven trying to see what's going to happen next. And for most of the night, Jesus is completely silent. He doesn't say anything at all. And then Jesus gets ready to make a statement, and it's going to be profound. And he says this in John chapter 18, verse 37, to this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. That I should bear witness unto the truth. Well, that begs another question. Why did Jesus need to witness to the truth? And again, there's multiple answers to this question. We could say, well, God's truth has been under attack, and certainly that's taken place since the very beginning, because there was a message of truth that God wanted to give. And that certainly is the case. We could say the world was deluded by lies, and that's always been the case as well. Here's a question. Would a man who knows the truth deliberately choose to believe a lie? Do you think that happens? Do you think that somebody that they know this is true, but they choose not to believe that, and rather they would believe a lie? Do you think people would actually do that? How many say yes, they would? Okay, how many say no, I don't think anybody would ever do that? So most everybody agrees that yes, this does happen. And in fact, Romans 1:25 says this, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator. So the point of Romans chapter 1 is there are people who know something to be true, and yet they deliberately turn from that, and they don't want to believe that, and they make a deliberate choice to believe something that's false. Why do people do that? Perhaps they don't like the implications of the truth, and they would prefer to think in terms of a different and alternate reality, a lie. So we've had this assault on the truth, and this goes all the way back to the beginning. Who knows what the first lie in this world was? That's right, exactly. It's Genesis chapter 3. It's Satan speaking, and he comes to Eve in the garden, and he says this, "You shall not surely die." The world's first lie. God had told them, if you eat of this fruit, and the day you eat of it, you will die. Satan comes along and he says, you shall not surely die. And Eve had to make a choice. Our ancestors chose poorly. And because of that, God had to curse all of his good creation, and we are suffering still today because of that. And so Jesus would say in John chapter 8, verses 44 to 45, Satan is the father of lies. Satan is the father of lies. But let's fast forward in time a little bit to the time of the prophet Isaiah. And in Isaiah's day, truth had fallen on hard times. And it got so bad that in Isaiah chapter 59, verse 14, Isaiah makes a very curious statement. He says, truth is fallen in the streets. Truth is fallen in the streets, and equity cannot enter. What does that mean? It's almost like truth is some kind of an object, and oh, there it goes, wham, it falls in the streets. What's he trying to say? I think the point is that truth, which should be valued and esteemed and respected, has gotten to the point where it's valueless. It's there to be stepped under feet. Do you remember the days of the Iraq War? Do you remember Iraq was under the heel of Saddam Hussein, this wicked dictator, and when the people of Iraq were freed from him, there was this initial burst of ecstasy and happiness at being delivered from a cruel dictator. And in Baghdad, crowds would rip down these statues of Saddam Hussein. I remember it on the nightly news. They'd get this rope up around the statue, and a whole crowd would pull on it, and bam, the statue would come down, and they're dragging it through the streets, and people would come up and kick the thing, and other people are whacking it with their shoe. And the point is, what had been revered and respected had fallen in the streets, and it was of no value. My friends, unfortunately, we live in a day that's quite similar to the way it was in Israel at the time of the prophet Isaiah. We live in a postmodern, pluralistic society. And one of the casualties of our time and the thinking that's awash in our society is truth. Truth. Well, what does postmodern mean? When we say we're going to talk about absolute truth in a postmodern world, what do we mean by postmodern? Well, way back at the turn of the century, there's a leading luminary in postmodernism named Richard Rorty, and in his book, Achieving Our Country, he says this: there are, to be true, a few cowboys who still believe in old-fashioned, honest-to-goodness, absolute truth. But thankfully, they are rare. Well, I count myself one of those rare people who still believes that absolute truth does exist. But postmodernists don't want to believe in absolute truth. Maybe we could illustrate postmodernism, give a little bit of a primer on postmodernism in terms of baseball. Well, we're coming into the summer season, and baseball is upon us. And Walter Truett Anderson has a famous illustration of postmodernism, and he uses 3 umpires to illustrate this, and I think it's insightful. The first umpire he references is the pre-modern umpire. Think back in the times of the kings, the great classical era, and the divine right of kings, and things were pretty black and white, and whatever the authorities said was absolutely adhered to. And this is the pre-modern era. We got Newtonian physics, and hey, this rules the world, and gravity operates the same way in every single part of the world. We've discovered this, and we assume it's everywhere out in the universe as well. And so the pre-modern umpire makes a statement. He says this: there are balls, and there are strikes, and I call them the way they are. There are balls and there are strikes, and I call them the way they are. In other words, shut up, because what I'm saying goes. What I'm saying is the truth. Well, the pre-modern umpire shuffles off from home base, and up comes the modern umpire. And he takes his position behind the catcher, and he says this: there are balls, there are strikes, and I call them the way I see them. There are balls and there are strikes, and I call them the way I see them. Think of Einstein, relativity. Some of those things that we took to be hard absolutes maybe aren't so much. And some things are a little bit gray in between here. And when we get down into the particles and up in the cosmic scene, some of those classical laws of physics aren't quite the same. And so the modern umpire would say, okay, there's black and there's white, but there's some gray in here. And hey, that's why we have instant replay and this type of thing. And so, but there are still balls and strikes. There is truth out there. But now, the modern umpire steps off the scene, and up steps the postmodern umpire. And the postmodern umpire says this: they ain't nothing until I call them. They ain't nothing until I call them. In other words, there's no such thing as a ball, there's no such thing as a strike until I say that's a ball, that's a strike, and then it becomes that to me. Question: can we play baseball that way? You really can't, can you? You have to have some rules that we all agree to, that, hey, this is the truth of the situation. Again, not saying there's not some gray in between, but there's got to be lots of black and white so we know where the boundaries are, right? There has to be truth out there, or we really can't even play the game. But this is all in vogue in philosophy and in morality and in higher academia, that there is no absolutes. There are no absolute truths, and we just need to be, sharing our opinion and really celebrating all the diversity that's out there and affirming it all. And that's reality for you, and this reality for you, and we have, all this relativity. Postmodernism. Here's Jean-Francois Lyotard, and he's a leading luminary in postmodernism, and he says, quote, simplifying to the extreme, I define postmodernism as an incredulity to meta-narratives. Now, does that definition help you? It might not help you too much. Let's just kind of tease this apart a little bit here. Postmodernism is an incredulity or a skepticism of meta-narratives. What's a meta-narrative? Yes. Right, it's a big story. Meta is large, narrative, it's a story. It's an overarching story, but specifically about origins, destiny, morality. Somebody give me an example of a meta-narrative. What's an example of a meta-narrative? Yeah, Christianity is a meta-narrative. Absolutely. Biblical Christianity is a meta-narrative. What would be a competing meta-narrative out there? Okay, yeah, Islam. Yeah, Hinduism. But even secular humanism, even evolutionism would be a meta-narrative. And so postmodernists are very dubious even about the scientists who think, we've got it all figured out. No. They like lots of tribal myths and lots of competing, minority viewpoints. Because there is no truth, see. And so they have not a lot of patience with our evolutionist friends either. Now here's Alan Bloom in his classic book, The Closing of the American Mind, and he makes a statement that I really like. He says this: more interesting is the coexistence of these opposing sentiments in the most advanced minds of our day. The same people who struggle to save the snail darter and worry about hunting deer defend abortion. The principle of contradiction has been repealed. So there's this disconnect, this fundamental illogic that's kind of been accepted in. The principle of contradiction has been repealed. So today we live in a day where lying is called spin, where deception is okay so long as you can get away with it and nobody's really hurt, and where the truth is of little value. No wonder Time magazine, March 2017, asked this question: is truth dead? Is truth dead? Let me tell you a story. A number of years ago, I moved into the neighborhood that I live in East Concord. And my children were fairly small at that point, and I determined I was going to go out and visit some of my neighbors and just start a conversation with them that might even be able to lead to discussing the Bible and God and Christianity. I often find that, if someone comes knocking on a stranger's door, it's not real productive, but it's nice to be able to reach out to your neighbors. They want to, hey, I'm your neighbor. I live 4 houses down the way, and so it's pretty effective to kind of, get a bit of relation with your neighbors. And so I was knocking on some doors, and here's my son with me, and we came up to this one door, and the whole yard was completely unkempt. It was just overgrown and wild and weeds everywhere, and the place was barely painted. And we came up onto the porch and knocked on the door, and lady answered, and I said, "Hi, I'm your neighbor, several houses down," told her where I lived, and she said, "Oh, have a seat here on the porch." So we sat on the porch, and we began to talk. And I said, "Hey, do you have any opinions on religion? Do you have any churches that you go to in the area?" And she said, "Oh, no. She said, I'm a witch." Well, this was the first time I encountered her. She said, "Well, I'm a white witch, and this and that." And I'm looking at my son, and I'm thinking, don't move. This is bad. My neighbor is a witch. She's going to get this little doll, Dino Dave, and start poking pins into it. So I'm worried about this situation, but we're getting a conversation going. And I said, "Well, do you believe that there's truth in this world? Do you believe that, there's a firm reality out there that we all need to discover?" And she made a statement that was very interesting. I'll never forget this. She said something like this. She said, "I don't believe in absolute morality or absolute truth. Some people see only black and white. Those folks end up in my suicidal counseling service. I see lots of gray." So my neighbor was very skeptical about thinking in terms of black and white. She's all about living where it's gray, and hey, there isn't anything that's clear. It's all foggy, and there is no truth, and it's just how do I feel, and how do you feel, and what do you think, and that's your reality, this is my reality, and they're both great. But can I suggest something? If I broke into my neighbor, the witch's house, and I hurt her children, and I stole all the things of value, I would bet she would be the first person to say, "Dino Dave is an absolute horrible criminal, and that immoral guy needs to be locked up for the rest of his life." And she would be correct. But how could she make a statement like that about morality or an appeal to morality or even right and wrong when I might come back and say, "Well, my reality, there wasn't anything wrong with it at all"? Who decides morality? Who decides right and wrong? You see, it's kind of cool and in vogue to say we all have our alternate realities. But guess what? You try going at red lights and stopping at green lights, and you see what happens to your new reality in the real world of traffic. It's not going to work out so well. Postmodernists don't like claims to truth or assertions that certain beliefs are wrong. They prefer discourse. I think this, or what if this, or let me share my experience. And I'm okay with saying that. I don't think anything like that is wrong. But my friends, at the end of the day, we have to deal with this issue of truth. This is something that's important to our God. We can't be all about totally changing our biblical Christianity to whatever happens to be in vogue philosophically. There are things that we must take a stand on, and one of them is this matter of truth. So how do we answer my neighbor the witch who says there is no truth? How do you answer somebody perhaps in your workplace or maybe even in your family that says, I just don't believe there's truth? Everything's relative. I'm going to present an argument that we're going to call the road runner argument. And this is out of a book by Frank Turek, so I'll give him the credit for it. But how many of you ever seen Looney Tunes? Raise your hands. Okay, those of you who don't have your hands up, you guys are lying. Everybody's seen Looney Tunes, right? And so my favorite Looney Tune character is the Road Runner, and this is the Road Runner argument. Now, one of the things you notice about in Looney Tunes is it has its own physics, right? And so here we have the roadrunner, and he's running off a cliff. Now, typically, it's Wile E. Coyote that's running off the cliff, but let's just, for the sake of this argument today, discuss it as the roadrunner argument. So when the roadrunner runs off the cliff, does he fall right away? No, he does not. This is very important in the world of Looney Tunes physics. He doesn't fall right away. He's just spinning, and he's wondering why he's not going anywhere. And then all of a sudden, he takes and he looks down. And once he realizes, he has to realize, once he realizes he's in thin air, then what happens? That's right, then he falls, kaplop. See? And so this roadrunner argument is a little bit like that, and it kind of pulls the carpet out from the postmodernists who say there is no truth. So let's say my neighbor comes along and she makes this statement. She says, there is no absolute truth. How are we going to respond to her? Here's how we respond. Is that an absolute statement? Is that an absolute statement? Now, if the witch says, oh, well, no, it isn't, then she's saying her own statement isn't true, and there is absolute truth. If, on the other hand, she says, well, yes, I just said it, I believe it, it's true, then what has she done? She's established at least one absolute truth, right? You see, this statement, there is no absolute truth, is a self-defeating proposition. It's incoherent. It's intellectually vacant. It's unintelligible. Oh, it might sound cool. You might even hear it from people that have doctorate degrees in a university. It's bunk. Well, let's go back to the initial scenario we began our discussion with, and that is Jesus Christ on trial before Pontius Pilate. And Jesus has made this statement, for this cause am I come into the world that I might bear witness unto the truth. What does Pontius Pilate say? Pontius Pilate comes back with a rhetorical question, and I can almost see him like throwing his hands up and saying, what is truth? And I don't think he's asking it like, oh, please, sir, can you tell me what truth is? I think he's like probably looking down on this poor subject in front of him and saying, what's truth? You see, Pilate had grown up in Rome, and in Rome they believe the emperor is God. And he had gotten a Greek education, and in the Greek thinking there's a whole plethora of gods out there, right? You got Zeus, and you got Diana, and you got, Aphrodites, and you got all these different gods out there. And now he's in Israel as a governor in a country or a region within the Roman Empire that says there's only one true God, and monotheism holds sway, and there's only Jehovah God. And he's looking at this man that's bound before him and saying, what is truth? R.C. Sproul put it this way: when Pilate walked away from Jesus with a cynical retort, he forsook the greatest authority ever on the greatest question of all time. What is truth? Well, everything that I've discussed so far is introduction. And I have 3 points. We're going to talk about defining truth, determining truth, and defending truth. Defining truth, determining truth, and defending truth. Now, universal truth exists as surely as God exists. If there's a creator God, then he has all knowledge, and he knows what's right and what's wrong, and he determines truth. Of course, Jesus Christ will come down and say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. John chapter 14 and verse 6. And that statement would be received today with a lot of skepticism. In today's climate, he would be viewed as insensitive, to say the least, maybe even arrogant and even intolerant. Who are you to think that amongst all the differing opinions in our pluralistic society that you have found the truth? Much less to say, I am the truth. Wow. I'm not sure that they wouldn't crucify him again today if he came back and made these statements. But I'm going to say something that's very basic, but rich in meaning. The nature of reality is not up for popular vote. The nature of reality is not up for popular vote. You see, reality is what it is, despite my opinion and your opinion. We might not like it. We might wish it were different. For example, I might have a personal crusade against gravity, and I might go all over the world and do, very strong statements that gravity doesn't apply to me. You might apply it to yourself, but I've chosen not to apply it to me. And moreover, I could jump off the top of a roof and I wouldn't fall. I would just kind of float off till I decided I was going to slowly descend nicely into some little meadow. But if I put my belief to a hard test, guess what's going to happen? Every single atom in my body is going to respond to the force of gravity, and reality will have its sway whether or not I believe in it. So whether you're classical or modern or postmodern, reality is what it is. Somebody define truth for me. What does that word actually mean? Let's move on with our first topic here, defining truth. Okay, it's reality. Very good. I like the way that R.C. Sproul puts it. He says, truth is that which affirms the nature of reality as it is, or we could say as it's perceived by God. Truth is that which affirms the nature of reality as it is. So it's a statement. And it's making an affirmation that corresponds with reality. Okay, if we define truth, how about this second step? How about determining truth? So absolute truth exists, but can we know it? Can we really know it? We don't always have God's complete knowledge, and we must admit that many of our dearly held propositions are true with a degree of uncertainty. This is the nature of historical truth, for example. We have a recollection that we can't easily go back in time and confirm. Maybe we could get other people's recollections and kind of get some confirmation that way. Maybe we could even have video that we go back and look at. But it's not always easy to go back and confirm everything historically. And the same is the nature with scientific truth. And so what happens is that you have folks, maybe even professors, that'll play little games with students. And they might ask something like this. I got my friend Joe here in the front row. And Joe, let me ask you a question. Don't tell me the year, but give me your birth date. What's your birth date? Okay, January 17th. So if I were to ask you, how sure are you that your birth date is January 17th? Would you say, I'm 100% sure, or maybe I'm 90% sure, or 50% sure? Okay, you're saying you're 100% sure it's the 17th. But what if it was actually the 19th? And as he was drawing the 9, his pen just slipped across, so it looked like a 7. But actually, your birthday was on the 19th. Would you admit that's even perhaps a possibility? Or perhaps you were born close to midnight. And as the doctor looked at his watch, his clock was running a little bit fast. And so rather than being born on that day, you actually were born on the following day. But he was a day off because his watch was off. Was that maybe even a possibility? It's possible, right? And so professors and philosophy will kind of get you thinking this way, like, wait a minute, I can't believe anything for sure, right? Everything's kind of gray. And they like to put forward this idea that, everything is relative, and we really can't know anything for sure. I want to present a scenario on truth that is given by a Unitarian minister called Forrest Church. And he was at one time probably the most popular, famous Unitarian minister in the United States. And his last name is Church, which is a pretty cool name, wouldn't you say, for a pastor. And he has this cathedral metaphor that he uses to illustrate what truth or what reality is like. I'm going to give you his scenario, and you tell me what you think about it. So Pastor Church says this: in the cathedral of the world, there are millions of windows. each telling its own story of who we are, where we came from, where we're going, each illustrating life's meaning. Every religious, philosophical, and even scientific worldview has a window, or many windows, through which the one light shines, refracting truth, bringing illumination to worshipers and seekers. No one can see the one light, truth, or God, call it what you will, directly, only as refracted through the cathedral windows. Now, what do you think of Pastor Church's cathedral metaphor? Do you like that? You don't like it. Why not? Yeah. Well, you say he doesn't believe in absolute truth. Notice he says here, he capitalizes truth and he capitalizes light. So I think he would say truth, he actually capitalizes it, is out there, but can you know it? No, you can't know it. That's right. So he's saying it's out there, but it's so diluted or colored or tinted or even refracted, bent, so you really can't get a good view of reality. Oh, you might have a bit of a perspective, but someone else has a different perspective, and someone else adds some insight over here. And so these different people kind of help fill out our idea, but nobody's got a real clear view of it. You can never know truth. We can just approximate it. That's the statement by Pastor Church. Now, is that a good analogy of truth? How would we respond to Pastor Church? Well, let's bring back our old friend, the Roadrunner. Pastor Church makes a statement, nobody can know the truth. Here's what we need to ask him. Is that statement itself true? Ooh. If he says no, well then why should we listen to him? What's the point? If he says yes, of course I believe it, I made the statement. Well then he says, I know the truth, at least I know one truth. And we have to ask him, what window are you looking out of? You see, it sounds really beautiful and clever and even really tolerant and kind of very attuned to the times, affirming. It's bunk. It is incoherent. Let me ask you this. Biblically, can we know the truth? Yes. Yes, the answer is yes. 1 Timothy 2:4. Who will have all men to be saved and to come unto the knowledge of the truth. So I'm not saying we've got everything figured out. We never will have everything figured out. I'm not saying there's not going to be areas where there's some doubt and good, sincere, and absolutely transparent people might come to different opinions. Absolutely. But there are a lot of things that are black and white in morality and in philosophy and in science. In 2012, a government contractor was accused of wrongdoing. The contractor stated in court, I don't really have any questions directed toward him, talking about a particular witness, because he has his own truth and I have my own truth. The judge wisely replied, well, there's a real truth out there, and that's what I'm here for, is to try to find that. And that's what we want to get to today. We want to get to the real truth or absolute truth. So how can we determine truth? And there's several categories we can put truth into. There are some things that are true by definition. That is mathematics. For example, we might say 1 + 1 = 2. Why? Because we've defined it that way. We all agree that way. It's a convention. Language the same way. We spell tree in the English-speaking language, T-R-E-E. We all agree on that, and so that is true by definition. Then there's also scientific truth and historical truth, which are more susceptible to revision as perhaps new knowledge comes to light, but there are statements that we could say are absolutely true scientifically, like gravity. Was there a historical figure, Jesus Christ? Absolutely, yes, that is true. But then we have revealed truth, and revealed truth, John 17:17, thy word is truth. And revealed truth doesn't change. And God has made some things abundantly clear that we just don't have to wonder about. And so, truth is discovered, not invented. Truth is discovered, not invented. The truth is reality. A reality's always been out there. Sometimes we have a mistaken notion of it, and science advances, so we come to find out that something that we thought was factual is actually not factual. Some theory gets falsified, but it's always been, reality has always been that way. We just were misguided. And truth is transcultural. That is, what's true here is true, what's true in Australia is true, what's true in Saudi Arabia is true. Someone's going to say, "Whoa, Dino Dave, you just went too far there." For example, they might say, here in the United States, if a young lady went out without her head coverings, there wouldn't be any issue of modesty. But you go to Saudi Arabia and you don't cover your head, so you go out in public, you're going to get in a lot of trouble because of some of their modesty regulations. So therefore, what's true here is not true in Saudi Arabia. This is an important idea. When you are making a reference, you need to bring the reference into your statement. If there's an implied reference, it has to be brought into your statement. And once you do that, the truth is true all over. For example, once I say it's true in Saudi Arabia that it's considered immodest for a young lady not to have her head covered. Well, that's a true statement. It's true in America. It's true in Saudi Arabia. And conversely, if I say it's true in the United States of America that a young lady doesn't have to have her head covered to be considered modest, that's true here and it's true in Saudi Arabia. We might have two people sitting in the congregation today, and one might say, "I feel like it's really hot in here in this room." Someone else might say, "I feel like it's really chilly in this room." Does that mean truth doesn't exist? No, we have to bring in the reference. Ms. A says it's really hot in here, and to her it's hot. That is true for everybody here. For Mr. B, it's very cool in here, and he's a bit chilly. He's feeling chilly. Again, we're bringing the referent in, and that's true then for everybody. Everybody can agree on that statement. But then we could also bring a thermometer in here and say the actual temperature in this room is X degrees centigrade. See, and there's an absolute truth. So truth is transcultural. And then truth is unchanging. Only what we believe to be true changes. And finally, all truth is absolute truth. All truth is absolute truth. Biblically, there is one character in the Bible that is especially concerned about truth, and that is the Apostle John. He's called the apostle that Jesus loves, perhaps because of his concern for the truth. The word true is found in John's writing 18 times, 6 times more than all the other gospel writers combined. The word truth also appears 18 times in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, his epistles. So he seems to be fixated on truth. Let me give you some specific examples. John says in John 1:1, "In the beginning was the Word." Well, what does that mean? Well, the Word, it's capitalized, it's Jesus, but why would we use that to describe him, the Word? Well, the Word is a communication. It's a statement. It's a affirmation. It's truth. In the beginning was the truth. John chapter 4 and verse 23. We must worship in spirit and truth. This is very important, this concept of truth. John 5:19, he says, "Truly, truly." And some older versions, "Verily, verily." He's the only writer that actually uses that phrase, and he uses it 25 times. In 3 John, verse 4, he uses the phrase, "walking in the truth." What does that mean? It's kind of almost like there's this aura about you, and as you walk, this kind of bubble moves with you. It's kind of like that Peanuts character that has the cloud that constantly hovers over him. Wherever he goes, the cloud goes. What's his name? Yeah, Pigpen, that guy. And then he just kind of moves with the cloud, right? Do you have an aura of truth about you? When you walk into a room, does maybe some of the lying and some of the gossip diminish? Because people might be hesitant to slander somebody in your presence because you're going to not tolerate it. You're going to say, well, that's not true of that person. Or why should we be talking about them that way when they're not here to defend themselves? Do you have this commitment to walking in truth? 3 John verse 12 says that a particular person has a good report of the truth. It's almost like truth is a report card and it's grading us. How are we doing with regards to the truth? Are we men and women of integrity? In Revelation 3:14, John is writing again, he talks about the true one, which is, of course, Jesus Christ himself. Well, let's go to our third D. We've established that there is absolute truth, and it's under assault. We determined that one can know the truth. The question remains, what should we do about it? Will this issue be a high priority in our lives? Defending truth. Defending truth. John 8:32 says, knowing the truth makes you free. What's John talking about there? Knowing the truth makes you free. Can I suggest something? If you just determine that you will be a person of the truth, you're just always going to say the truth, you can sleep well at night. You don't have to try to remember, what did I tell that person last time to try to impress them, and what did I tell that person? I want to make sure we never get the two of them together, and I kind of have to try to keep these different stories straight in my mind, because I'm just going to tell the truth. It's an easy way to live. It makes you free. You're not shackled with lies. Proverbs 23:23 says this, buy the truth and sell it not. I'm looking at some young people in the congregation today. You're going to make a decision how you're going to build your life. Is it going to be on the philosophical whims of the day? Is it going to be on things that seem to get you ahead by kind of shading the truth and telling some lies to kind of make yourself in a better light or impress people or get out from underneath some punishments or difficulties along the way? Or are you just going to be a person committed to the truth? Are you personally committed to truthfulness in your words? Are you? Honestly, are you personally committed to truthfulness in your words? How big a deal is this in your life? I'll give you an example. Let's say a young lady friend of yours walks into the room all of a sudden, and she's got a brand new hairdo, and she comes walking up to you and says, how do you like my new hairdo? And you look at it, that is the most terrible hairdo she's ever had. And you look at it and say, oh, I like it. It's so pretty. Now you're laughing, but is it true? You might say, well, Dino Dave, that's kind of a silly illustration. Hey, listen, you at least could say, it's amazing, right? But to make the determination that we are going to be people of truth and not to start shading it, to have character and integrity. This is very important to God. Jeremiah lived about the same time as the prophet Isaiah. And in Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 1, God says this, run to and fro through the streets of Jerusalem and see now, and know and seek in the broad places thereof, if you can find a man, if there be any that executes judgment, that seeks the truth, and I will pardon it. This is so important to God that God said, if you can find one single, solitary person in the whole city, the capital city of Israel, that's committed to the truth, I'll pardon the whole city. And they couldn't find a person. And Jerusalem fell and went into captivity. That's how important this issue is. What if God said that about Concord, New Hampshire, and said, look all over and see if you can find one person that's just absolutely committed to being honest and truthful and a person of integrity, and I'll bless that whole city, or I'll spare that whole city. Would you be that person? Would you be that person today that could take a stand? Ephesians chapter 6 deals with the area of our spiritual armor. And the very first piece of armor that is listed is the belt of truth. Why is that the first piece of armor? I think God is saying this. Just like when you get up in the morning, you dress in a certain order, the first thing you do is you put on your undergarments. That's real easy. Just do that before you even have to decide what kind of mood you're in to wear this color or that color. The first thing we need to do in the morning when we get up is to put on that belt of truth. To have our loins girded about with truth. And we say, listen, I'm going to be a person of integrity, come what may today, because even, hey, the shield of faith and even, the helmet of salvation, I mean, unless you're committed to truth, what's the value of it? Of the gospel even? See. This is fundamental to our worldview. And increasingly, we can expect the truth will be under attack. 2 Thessalonians 2:11 says the end times will be a time where people believe the big lie. That's one of the reasons I think that we're perhaps close to the end times. So are you willing to stand for truth? Are you? Is this going to be an important issue in your life? Are you going to make a determination that as you dress yourself to go out and do spiritual warfare, you're going to put on the belt of truth? That you will be a person that will stand for truth in a post-modern world.